That day I first opened up my Zoom classroom, I remember all 20 of my students' Zoom squares were brightly lit up, their beaming faces staring back at me, their names in their lower left-hand corners. I took roll, everyone was there, we launched into class, everything was going smoothly, and then we had a mysterious visitor arrive. Their camera was not on, so the Zoom square was dark, and right in the middle, in capital letters, C-H-U-D, Chud. "Can I help you?" I asked. Chud remained eerily silent. The students were already firing questions in the chat. "Who's Chud? Maybe it's so-and-so. No, I'm right here." "Well, can you turn your camera on, Chud?" Chud remained eerily silent. "Can you add something to the chat?" Now, at this point, one of the students did what most students do. They Googled Chud, and they discovered the first thing that came up was a 70s horror film by that name. Chud was an acronym for Cannibalistic Human-Eating Underground Dwellers, and I've since seen the trailer for this. There's a woman walking down a dark street. "Hello, is somebody there?" And some creature crawls out of a manhole, grabs her and pulls her under and rips her to pieces. Well, this did nothing to dispel the growing suspicion that this is what I had been warned about, that this was a Zoom bomber. And so, I ejected Chud. I pressed remove. The thing was, Chud kept coming back. He came back that day, the next day, the following day, for 3 days, multiple times, and I just began unceremoniously removing Chud to the grateful cheers of my students. Chud denied, Chud given the boot, Chud flushed down the drain where he belongs. Now, the creepy thing about Chud was how bad the connection was. There'd be this spinning wheel and it said joining. And when I removed him, there'd be a spinning wheel that said leaving. It was like he was zooming from a mountaintop or something. "No, that's just West County," one of the students said, and everybody laughed. But nobody laughed when a student said, "Maybe he really is zooming from the sewer, Brandon." Things came to a head in my office hours. Now, this is where I open up a Zoom room. Students come for individual help. I wasn't expecting anybody. I was reading a book. And when I looked up, twinkling shamelessly in my Zoom room, Chud. Now, without a student audience, I became much bolder. "All right, Chud," I said. "What do you want? What, are you some kind of bully? Are you some kind of weirdo? Go on, get out of here, you jerk, and never come back." And I pushed remove. Now, if this were a horror film, this would be where the music gets a little heavier, a little more intense. This is the part of the film where somebody's been running through the woods to discover they've come right back where they started. They've been going in circles. This is the part where the main character locks themselves in the closet to discover the killer's in the closet with them. This is the part where the main character cuts off the head of a monster and 2 more grow back. I since learned how this works, but because their connection was so bad, they were leaving and joining at the same time, the ultimate effect was that shimmering threateningly in my office hours were now 2 Chuds, flanking me, flickering fiercely like some predator that was gonna bring me down and rip me to pieces. I began to panic. And then I fumbled for the mouse. I groped around. I couldn't find anything. I looked for an object. I needed some kind of weapon, something to brandish at the dark frame that was Chud. And my hand landed on a San Francisco Giant spirit horn. I decided to deploy it. I pulled it open, locked it in place, and I gave it a blow with a sputtering prelude that gave way to 3 sonic blasts. And Chud was gone. I did it. I had blasted Chud right out of my classroom. I caught my breath. I began to regain my confidence that I could and had defend the sanctity of my classroom. But my triumph was short-lived. Something new joined my office hours. The camera was on, and although they were muted, I could tell they were furious. Their camera kept freezing on expressions of fury and outrage. It was a lady with a rubber shower cap and a bathrobe. And that was when I noticed in the lower left-hand corner the words California Housing and Urban Development Office, which, as many of you out there probably have already realized, is the proper expansion for the acronym CHUD. Well, she was furious. She ripped off her shower cap with no small amount of her own hair, from which dangled a hair curler, and she chucked it at my computer screen. Now, what had I done to make this woman, and by extension, the Office of the California Housing and Urban Development Office, so angry at me? I fumbled for the mouse. I had the horn in my hand, but that was no use. And so in a totally disoriented panic and full of frustration, I leapt up and went for the cord. I ripped it from the wall, ending my office hours, ending this Zoom call, cutting power to my computer completely. I wasn't going back on until someone cleared this up. Darren Duarte, Dean of Students, Darren Duarte, he cleared it up. It had originally been one of our Sonoma Academy students. He had been given the wrong link to the wrong humanities class. Very bad Wi-Fi. His father worked for the California Housing and Urban Development Office. He was using his Zoom account. And of course, after I had repeatedly ejected him, yelled at him, blasted him with a horn, he had become increasingly anxious and even distressed, which is when his mother had stepped in. Well, Darren sorted it all out. He got the proper link to the proper humanities classroom. Sean and Changa went over and fixed his Wi-Fi problems. And me, well, let's just say I apologized profusely to that family. And they graciously accepted it. Now, a year later, most of my students don't have their cameras on. They're all dark squares. They say, oh, my Wi-Fi's not working. But I know they're microwaving mac and cheese. They're in bed snuggling. And they all change their names to anime characters, SpongeBob. I have one student who comes as the Grim Reaper with a skeleton on as his icon. But we all know it's just Elijah. Thank God. Monday, we're going back. We'll be in person. About a month ago, I had a shift at a materials pickup. That's where students pick up packets of photocopies, ceramic tools, science lab kits. My shift was 3 to 6. 6 o'clock rolled around. Everything had been picked up except for one science kit. I looked at the name and it rang a bell, but it wasn't one of my humanities students. That was when, at about 6:08, 8 minutes after the shift ended, a little white pickup truck came roaring up and skidded to a stop. Out jumped a woman in a mask. She was apologizing and thanking me for waiting. Her husband from the truck called. It was my fault. I was late getting off work. And that's when I read on the truck, California Housing and Urban Development. I stood up. Chud, I blurted, and then I said the correct name of the student. She was putting it together. Brandon. And for a moment, there was silent tension. After all, on Zoom, we had been monsters to one another. But in real life, we saw immediately past that. She laughed, and I laughed, and she laughed even harder, and our hands reached out. And I know that if we hadn't been under these quarantine social distancing regulations, we would have given each other a friendly hug. Well, that friendly hug and so many other wonderful things will just have to wait a little bit longer. Thank you.